Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, another installment of Beards and Cars. For those who maybe haven't clicked on any of these before, this is my podcast style series where we get into more of an in-depth discussion about any particular topic. Could be a countdown sometimes, maybe the occasional rant even. And this time I wanted to get into another community suggested topic. And it's a good one, and it's a very broad one, a very abstract concept. And of course we talk about stuff like this every so often, like asking why things are the way they are rather than just what things are. Because of course most of the time on the channel we deal purely in facts. Numbers, specs, how cars compare to each other, reviewing them, tuning them. It's all very fact-based stuff. Then though, especially in Beards and Cars, we sometimes stray away from that and get into the more, you could say, philosophical side of talking about cars, where you can really sink your teeth into the subject and think about it more deeply. So instead of asking, like, why did someone make a car, or instead of asking what did they make, ask why they made it, that kind of thing. Now on this occasion, this is definitely one of those questions. It's an extremely popular question. People sometimes word it differently, and it tends, funnily enough, to be people who aren't petrol heads who usually ask the question. That's the funny thing. If you meet someone who isn't a huge car fan, and you tell them that you are, I would say the most common question that they usually ask, if they're going to ask anything, is, so what's your favourite car? And they almost ask it just out of, politeness. They don't really care, and they probably wouldn't even know what car you say when you tell them. But another common question for people who don't know anything or little to nothing about cars, and it doesn't tend to be petrol heads who ask it, is the title of the video. What's the best car ever made? What makes a perfect car? What would you say a really good car is? And the problem with the question is, straight off the bat in this video, it's impossible to answer. And the reason why it's impossible to answer isn't because I'm literally saying nobody could ever give an answer to it. It's because the question is so ridiculously badly worded that people don't realise how dumb a question that actually is. So to ask what the best car ever made is, and by the way, I'm not saying that the community member is stupid for asking it. It's a great topic. But when people unironically ask that question, it's very short-sighted, because by definition, good or perfect or best are very loose words. You're not talking about facts here, you're talking about opinions, and that is where you get into the grey territory, because by definition, again, what the best car ever made is, even just as a concept, that's like one of the broadest questions you can imagine. But the problem is, what's the best car for one person will categorically not be the best car for someone else. So for instance, you bring your personal preference into the equation, you bring your life experience into the equation with good or bad cars that you've owned before and things that you liked about them, things that you hated about them. You bring in your gaming experience, especially if you're a younger person, cars that you like to drive and don't like and like the look of. And then, for instance, if you're a certain type of driver, say you're an off-road fan, say you're a family man, say you're a bachelor millionaire with his own private racetrack, what your definition of best is going to vary wildly because of what your circumstances require. And that's the whole point. So what is the best car ever made? There isn't one. However, you can ask it from that person's specific point of view and circumstance, and I think that tends to be the answer that most people give anyway, but it's just interesting to discuss that kind of ironic dichotomy, I guess you could say, between the question and the answer, where people tend to answer it in the right way, even though the question itself is ridiculously broad, far too broad. So for me, for instance, if somebody asked me what do I think the best car ever made is, well then of course I have to bring my own circumstances, my own desires, my own preferences into that equation. So for me, for instance, that would mean stuff like it has to be good looking, it has to sound good, it has to be something that I'm proud of owning, it has to be practical, at least to some degree, so a minimum of, say, 4 seats, a decent amount of trunk space for shopping, or just any reason, dead body, whatever. It has to be, to some degree, usable in most weather, and it has to be something that's fast and powerful, not necessarily the fastest thing around, but cover all of those bases. It has to be a good price, so it could be expensive but not ridiculously expensive. The key word there is value. It has to be worth the price that people ask of it. So those are quite a few different things. That's like probably 10 different things. So for me, there are 3 cars that immediately come to mind that fall under all of those categories. The first one, of course, is my dream car, the Ferrari FF. It ticks all of those boxes. It looks great to me. It sounds great. It's fast. It's powerful. It's got 4 seats. It's spacious, which I need. It's got great trunk space. It's all-wheel drive, so it's safe, or much safer than most Ferraris in inclement weather. It's decent enough off-road. Not, of course, mud plugging, but you know what I mean. It's expensive, but not ridiculously expensive, and it's definitely something that I would be very proud to own. So it ticks all of the boxes. So for me, the best car ever made is the Ferrari FF. But I could also tick all of those boxes for the Aston Martin Rapide, for the exact same reasons, including that I would love to own one. And the third car ticks, let's say, all but one of them, and that is the Tesla P90D. Because although I don't necessarily want to own one anymore, although I used to, I would pick the Aston or the Ferrari over it any day, I will say that I believe the Tesla is about as close to the best car ever made, again, for my preference, that I can think of. Maybe even more so, actually, than the Aston Martin and the Ferrari, technically speaking, because you've got 7 seats, trunk space in the front and the back, it's extremely safe, it's over-engineered, in fact, when it comes to safety, all-wheel drive, incredible acceleration, far cheaper to run because of electricity compared to fuel. You can charge it up very quickly. It's got fantastic performance. It's expensive, but not stupidly expensive, especially given the development costs of it. And to boot, it's kind of a sleeper to some degree. So for me, I would say that the Tesla is maybe the best car ever made, according to the parameters that I would want from a car. But ironically, I still would choose the Aston or the Ferrari over it. Now, if you then compare that to someone else, if you ask that guy who I mentioned earlier, the hypothetical person who is, say, a millionaire, lives in a bachelor pad, you know, he's got his own private racetrack, and he works from home, so he never needs to go out that much. He's like the Bruce Wayne type. What would his idea of a perfect car be? Well, probably one of 2 things. Either a 2-seater sports car, like a Lambo or a Ferrari or whatever, or a single-seater track toy that he can just drive around his track like a Formula car. So completely different parameters depending on the circumstance. And it's about much more than just the budget as well. It's the kind of person you are, the kind of things that you want from the car. And in the past, I have genuinely known people who unironically would say without any hesitation that they believe the best car ever made is the Land Rover. And although that's not the case for me, I can totally understand what you mean by that. Because yeah, I would agree that when it comes to having this bolt-on, bolt-off automotive Meccano set that can go anywhere, pretty much do anything, and has been used consistently for decades to accomplish so many different tasks, in so many different roles, in so many different sectors of work, from military to ambulances, to fire trucks, to maintenance vehicles, to motorhomes, to leisure vehicles, the Land Rover, it's a strong argument for the best car ever made. But again, it's different parameters. So that's the interesting thing. And I think for many people, especially those who are maybe a bit younger, maybe you're more game-oriented, maybe you haven't even owned a car yet, for instance, I can imagine a lot of people saying that they believe the Nissan GT-R is the best car ever made. And again, although I don't agree with it, I can understand that reasoning for the similar reason to why I would say the Ferrari is. Because it's affordable, especially compared to the performance that you get. It's almost unbeatable as far as street vehicles go if used correctly. You could say it looks good, it's down to personal preference. You could say it sounds good, again, preference. 4 seats, decent trunk space, all-wheel drive, surprisingly forgiving, spacious, ticks all the boxes again. Now, for me, it doesn't. I would never buy a GTR. But I can understand totally why many people would consider that to be the best car ever made. You could even use that argument, as abstract as it is, to say that the Lister Storm is the best car ever made for the exact same reasons. It's a true supercar, but it's got 4 seats, plenty of trunk space. It was the fastest 4-seater car in the world for over a decade, and the only car that beat it was technically an aftermarket tuner, the Brabus Rocket, so I still consider the Lister Storm to be the true fastest 4-seater supercar. It's super exclusive, expensive but kind of understandable for what it is, iconic, looks like nothing else, sounds great, and it's certainly quick. That's kind of the point. And it has racing pedigree to boot. So you could even make a strong argument that the Lister Storm road car is the best car ever made. Now again, I wouldn't agree with that, but it just highlights how broad this question can be. Now, from one point of view, that's really cool, because it means that you can have really out there discussions. I mean, how many discussions would you have where you have the Lister Storm, the Land Rover, the Tesla, and the Ferrari FF all in the same discussion for the same thing? Not many discussions are going to have that, and that's the thing about how broad the parameters of what's the best car ever made is. Now, I'm not going into this video, and I don't plan to end this video by saying that there's some magical method that you can tell the person or give an answer that will shut anyone up or give anyone a satisfactory answer, because it just changes so much. And I think the thing that's most important about the question is that anyone who asks you a question about cars asks you, generally speaking, more often than not, for one of two reasons. They're either asking you because they genuinely care what you think, or they're asking you because they want to tell you what they think, and they have to ask you almost out of politeness. Now, those two things can result in the same question. That's the funny thing. So some people will ask you, what do you think the best car ever made is, because they genuinely want to learn what kind of petrol head you are, and to get some idea of what kind of personality you might have. Those people tend to be the non-petrol heads. The petrol heads, on the other hand, they tend to ask you the question not because they want to know what you think it is, but because they want to tell you what they've already decided it is. And that's the funny difference. Now, of course, there are always grey areas, people who ask for different reasons, but that tends to be the two predominant ones. So it's an interesting discussion to have, I think. It's not necessarily a video that needs to go on for as long as episodes usually do, but an interesting topic nonetheless. And I think later on I might put up a community post on the channel asking for more topics that you'd like to discuss in future as well, because we've still got a lot, but it's more like this kind of more abstract discussion is always fun to have, because opinions can go all over the place. And again, you bring your life experience into it, how much or how little you have with or without cars, with or without games. It's just a cool discussion to have, and ultimately kind of a pointless one, but sometimes pointless discussions can be fun. So ultimately that's it for this kind of shorter episode today, and so I'll see you next week. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.